Ooh.
Fantastic. I can do it. Yeah.
Okay, so, welcome. Looking forward to your presentation. My name is Barney Rosenberg. I'm your chief judge today, and the other judges will introduce themselves. So you know, I've been doing this for only 18 years. And I'm really looking forward to your presentation. I'm actually an ethics officer by trade. I work for a British company. We're in the aerospace business.
My name is Ken Solomon, and welcome to everyone. Between Barney and myself, we have 19 years of experience. It's been an enjoyable day so far. I've been on the other side of the podium where you are right now, so all I can say is just relax and enjoy it and make the most of it, and good luck.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Carlos Garcia. I am the Compliance Counsel for the Americans in TE Connectivity. We are in aerospace, in transportation, and other businesses. Unfortunately, I have not been that far in the compliance field as my colleagues here, but I have 10 years in experience on ethics and compliance, previously with Bristol Myers Squibb. So enjoy the ride.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Travis Navarro, and I'm here with my colleagues Abigail, Kara, James, and Alicia. And we are from IBECC Consulting. And before we start, we'd like to extend a thanks to you, Uber's Board of Directors, for having us here today to present. Specifically, we'll be presenting on Uber's pricing strategy and its use of a dynamic pricing model called surge pricing. Throughout our presentation, we'll go through the business, ethical, and legal aspects of this strategy with the end goal of providing a recommendation that we believe best satisfies Uber's competing obligations. And so Uber as a company has been very successful. However, part of this success has brought outrage due to its use of its surge pricing strategy. And when we look to the Twitter sphere, we can clearly see this, with many customers expressing distaste over the prices they've paid. For example, disgusted to be charged £95 for a 40-minute journey tonight that should have cost £28. Will never recommend this app again. And while these comments are coming in from cities as varied as the cities that Uber serves itself, from transit-oriented places such as New York City or Miami, which has a relative dearth of transit options. And we ultimately see surge pricing in its present incarnation with things such as a 6.9 times surge as being bad for business, as it threatens the firm's brand image and limits its ability to attract and retain customers. But also, more seriously, we think that surge pricing poses another negative implication. For all of those users that posted outrage over their fares the previous day or the previous night, we have many more users to think about, entire segments of the population that simply cannot afford to use Uber when it's at a 3 out of 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times surge. And when we look at experiences such as the Sydney hostage crisis, where surge prices hit 11 times, New Year's Eve 2015, where surge prices hit 9, 10, 11 times across the country, and the recent transit shutdowns, where Uber prices hit 5, 6 times, we see that the company has an ethical dilemma facing it. Because these users, if you cannot afford a surge of that price, they must either wait for that surge to end, they must turn to often unreliable transit alternatives, or simply give up their trip altogether. And as a result, we see the company's model as not pricing out trips as is the goal, but pricing out entire segments of the population. And as we will argue throughout the presentation, we view this as unethical. And as a result, your CEO, Travis Kalanick, must make a decision on whether or not Uber will become an ethical company when it comes to its pricing model. And now I'd like to run you through our roadmap of the rest of our presentation. Myself and Kara will go through the foundation, laying what we believe is essential to our analysis. Then Abigail will run through the business and legal principles and implications of surge pricing. James will talk through the ethics and also looking at the alternative solutions we considered and ultimately why we decided those weren't the best. And finally, Alicia will go through the recommendation and explain how we believe our recommendation best satisfies Uber's business, legal, and ethical responsibilities. And as we start to lay this foundational framework, I'd like to turn your attention to your mission statement, that Uber as a company wants to make transportation as reliable as running water, everywhere, for everyone. And this mission statement has driven the company to enormous success, a $40 billion valuation, services across 60 continents, and 404 cities worldwide, disrupting transportation wherever the company goes. And a large part of this success has been the company's ability to innovate outside of the regulatory framework that taxis operate in. And one of these innovations has been the availability and reliability of services at the touch of your smartphone. And one of the main features that has allowed that is surge pricing, which my colleague Tara will now explain in depth.
Surge pricing was implemented on New Year's Eve 2010, as a way for the company to meet the increased potential demand it saw for that busy evening. It's a dynamic pricing model as it increases fare on a multiple of the base fare for a limited geographical area. It's intended to maximize allocative efficiency, to adjust supply and demand so that they intersect. It increases supply by increasing the fares, which turns to more compensation for drivers. It also decreases the demand because fewer riders and fewer rides will be taken because of the higher prices for the ride. So who are the stakeholders that Uber needs to consider when making this decision? The current riders, drivers, the shareholders, regulators, and the public at large. While the customers, suppliers, and shareholders are maybe the very common stakeholders we would think of, regulators are particularly important in this case because of the disruptive nature of Uber's technology and because of the threat of potential legislation coming for Uber. And finally, the public at large is an important stakeholder because Uber fundamentally changes the paradigm of transportation wherever it operates. So finally, we'd like to talk about Uber as a public service. It's a public service, and we can see this in 3 ways. First, it's a product offering. When it initially began, it was a luxury service, a private car, black car service. Now, which is the Uber Black. UberX is now what they offer most primarily, which is the common, kind of like a taxi, very common non-luxury vehicle. Secondly, in strategic communications, as Travis mentioned earlier, its mission statement makes it clear that it wants to be the transportation of choice for everyone, everywhere. It also has aggressively advertised itself to be the cheaper and therefore the better alternative to other transportations like taxis. Finally, there are external actors that have labeled it in ways that we see as congruent with our public service designation. For example, the Maryland Public Service Commission concluded in its case that Uber was in this case that the undisputed facts and circumstances in Uber's case make it clear that Uber is engaged in the public transportation of persons for hire. And we believe that decision from Maryland's Public Service Commission, it will just be the start of a trend for other states and localities. So why does it matter that Uber is a public service? As a public service, Uber needs to make its mission statement a reality and not just in theory. So in theory, surge pricing is supposed to price rides and match that price with the value each rider places on the ride, as well as motivate drivers to be on the roads to meet the demand. In reality, though, those high multiples don't discourage certain rides; they discourage whole classes of riders. And as a public service, it's unacceptable for that to occur. An 11 times or even a 5 or 6 times surge is not affordable for most individuals. And next, Abigail will talk about business considerations.
Good morning, and thanks for having us. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about your business and how it's changed. First, Uber has gone, as Kara mentioned, from a luxury good to UberX, a service that Uber advertises as being available to everyone. As you can see here on the slide, this is some of your own advertisements. In New York City, UberX, now cheaper than a New York City taxi. Your business model is changing. Now, Travis Kalanick, your CEO, said it best. When Uber is cheaper than owning a car, we can become a mainstay of transportation in the city. Now, one thing that you've thought about a lot, I'm sure, is your competitive environment. You're not the only service that is disruptive in many cities. Competitors are threatening you from left and right. First, they attract riders with different business models, lower fares. Your unlimited surge pricing can be hard for consumers to swallow, so your competitors are taking on a different strategy. From another level, they use different ways to attract drivers. There are very low switching costs, so drivers can easily switch from one service to another. Competition has become very important to your pricing strategy in particular. Now, is Uber's surge pricing model good business sense for you? There are three main shareholders, riders, drivers, and your shareholders in general, that really care about the way that your pricing strategy impacts your business. Now, balancing these stakeholders is even harder, given the fact that riders and drivers often want very different things from your pricing strategy. What do riders want? They want an availability of rides at a price that suits them. But what do your drivers want? Drivers want the higher surge prices because they're able to work on commission and get more money. How can you balance the needs of riders, giving them an availability of affordable rides, and drivers, resulting in correct and fair driver compensation, while still giving profit to your shareholders? You need to have a strategy that combines all three of these shareholders and gives the most profit for Uber as a whole. Now, I'll also move on to talk about the legality of surge pricing. Does price surging equal price gouging? As I'm sure you're aware, many critics of Uber's price surging strategy have on social media called it price gouging. Now, that's a term that has a lot of legal implications. What is price gouging? Unfortunately, the legislation differs from state to state. In California, it's very specific. It's a 10% increase in the price of a good directly after emergency. But in other states like South Carolina and Alabama, they use words like a gross disparity or unconscionable. This can apply to many different situations. Now, in general, there's no consensus on which products apply to price gouging as well. Though in some states, petroleum products are specified. In Massachusetts, this is the case, as well as in Illinois. But in some states, any products can apply. For example, in Michigan, price gouging can apply to any product, and it doesn't even have to be an emergency. So why is this important? Given the fact that petroleum products has been mentioned in multiple states as something that can be gouged, we argue that transportation is something that many states consider a necessary good, especially in times of emergency. Now, if price surging is related to price gouging, how is price gouging regulated? And the truth is that states have a lot of ability to regulate price gouging. Most states, that's 30 to be exact, have anti-price gouging laws, and many of those states there are civil penalties like fines or a revocation of license, but in some states it's actually a criminal penalty as well. And many anti-price gouging regulations are purposefully vague so that they can apply to many different situations when the situation requires it. Now, in some states, price gouging goes completely unchecked, but that's the exception and not the rule. As we can see, surge pricing is regulated very differently than price gouging, though it is true that some municipalities are harsher than others. In New York City, for example, the Attorney General can make sure that Uber has a cap in the times of emergencies on price surge. And as Kara mentioned before, in Maryland, the common carrier distinction may limit their ability to surge in the future. Uber's price surge is significantly less regulated than price gouging, but we believe that consumer outrage will lead to more regulation in the future. What's one example? Meyer versus Kalanick and the U.S. New York Southern District of New York case. This case has alleged that Kalanick has actually hiked prices too high and that there's price fixing going on. Now, this case was actually just denied a motion to dismiss. So given all of these facts, we believe that more regulation is on the way and that Uber should be ahead of the curve. And now James will take it away with some ethical implications of surge pricing.
Thank you, Abigail. Uber is a 21st century company, and the most successful and sustainable 21st century companies are the ones that are not driven by profits alone, but have an ethical grounding of their operations. Uber was built to fill a need. And along the way, we believe that you've stumbled upon an ethical theory based on need. The riders who need the rides the most are the ones who are most willing to pay for the rides. The riders who don't need rides would not pay for the rides or would not receive them in times of high demand. So here's an idea of how your justification of surge pricing would work in theory. So we have someone on the left side getting a Frappuccino from Starbucks on a hot summer day. And on the right side, someone rushing to the hospital to visit their ailing relative. So in times of normal demand, because Uber's fares are relatively low, both these people would have relative availability of rides because they wouldn't have to pay too much for them and surge pricing would not be implemented. And in times of extraordinarily high demand, in theory, the supply would increase as drivers are incentivized to rush to the areas of high demand under surge pricing. And the person who is rushing to the hospital to visit their grandmother would receive that increased supply because they need the ride the most. They would be most willing to pay for it. The person getting a Frappuccino would say maybe another time. This is what happens. This is what you believe happens with surge pricing. The reality of surge pricing, however, is much different. Whether someone receives a ride is not based on whether they need the ride or not, but is based on their level of affluence. Here's how surge pricing works in reality. So in times of normal demand, the less affluent person and the more affluent person would also have relative availability of cars because surge pricing is not enacted, and again, Uber has worked to lower their base fares over time. The problem emerges in times of extraordinarily high demand. Supply does increase as drivers are incentivized under surge pricing to go to these areas of higher demand. The problem is that who receives this greater supply are the more affluent people, the more people with more money in their pocket to pay those higher prices. Whether the less affluent person is just getting a Frappuccino or is visiting their grandmother in the hospital, she is priced out of a ride. She will not receive the greater supply. Surge pricing prices out these less affluent people. We argue that this is not an ethical pricing model for Uber. An ethical pricing model for Uber is one that is fair to its riders and its drivers. In fulfilling a role as a public service, which is your stated goal, you have an obligation to the entire market because you are serving the entire market, from the less affluent to the more affluent. Under Rawls's theory of the fair play principle, actors who accept the benefits of serving a market have to accept the obligations that go with fulfilling that market. You are serving an entire market of from less affluent to more affluent by replacing the modes of transportation, by replacing taxis and buses that all of these people serve. And in filling that role, you therefore have an obligation under this theory, we argue, to not price out portions of that market since you are filling that role. Why do you specifically have this obligation? Why can't you price however you want? Because you're not selling diamonds. You can't price your products based on perceived brand image or demand. You're filling this role that millions of people require to get to work, to get from point A to point B. And if your business strategy goes as you intended to go, you will be replacing taxi services and transit for millions of people. And therefore, since you're accepting these benefits, you have an obligation to serve the less affluent people who are priced out through surge pricing. So surge pricing is not, therefore, the best model for Uber to continue to fulfill your legal, business, and ethical considerations. But what is? Here we present some proposed pricing models that your competitors use to to fulfill your obligations. So the first model that we considered was an unlimited surge model, your current model. As we said before, this moderates demand by increasing prices and creates supply by incentivizing drivers to go to these areas of higher demand. But we have discussed already the legal considerations, the business considerations, and the ethically unjustifiable nature of surge pricing. The second model is a capped surge. So this surge pricing is implemented, but it's capped at a certain multiple of demand. Your major competitor, Lyft, uses this model and caps surges at 2 times normal base fares. This also moderates demand and achieves a level of affordability because consumers are not hit with these 10 to 11 times price surges. However, we believe that a low cap surge alone decreases the levels of allocative efficiency that decreases Uber's ability to fulfill its mission statement of being everywhere for everyone. This is not the right model for Uber to take to fulfill its business strategy. The last model is that your competitors are using is a flat rate model, just like a taxi ensuring a certain flat rate per distance. This has the benefits of affordability, no surge pricing, no increased prices based on demand. An additional supply is created because your competitors who are using this model are also implementing ride sharing. So you can't get your own ride, you have to share a ride with others who are along that same route. While this does have affordability, it eliminates allocative efficiency, and you will not be able to fulfill your mission of being everywhere for everyone without having some way to adjust supply with demand. So none of these pricing models, and especially your current model, fulfill the ethical, legal, and business considerations that we have discussed in this presentation. Alicia will now propose a recommendation to the desk.
Thank you, James. So we believe we've come up with a recommendation for Uber that fulfills the obligations that you have from an ethical, business, and legal standpoint. So we have come up with an original solution that is demand-based rather than event-based. And it's 3-tiered. So 3 thresholds of demand and a different way for Uber to react at each of those thresholds. The first threshold will be a capped price surge at 3 times. And for reasons I will discuss shortly, we don't believe that this multiple is an unfair number. At the second threshold, driver commission percentage will be increased as a way to incentivize increased supply of drivers on the road. And at the third tier, we recommend a mandatory Uber pool to maximize availability. So let's dig a little deeper into each tier. The first tier would occur at organically created increases in demand. So for example, rush hour on a Friday evening. So here we believe that allocative efficiency does work to ensure that those who need a ride the most are the ones who get it first. So that's why here we do recommend keeping a price surge but with a cap at 3 times. Why 3 times? So there's 2 main reasons. The first is that the average cap of surge pricing historically for Uber during rush hour has been 2.7 times. And due to the lack of customer complaints, we believe that does work effectively to ensure availability during times like rush hour. The second, more important reason, however, is that Uber's fares in the majority of cities during times of normal demand are actually 30 to 50% of what the fares are of established taxi services. So a 3 times surge actually just brings Uber's fares up to the level of what its competitors are already doing during times of normal demand. So going to the second tier. The second tier will be reached when an outside force creates an arbitrary increase or spike in demand. So for example, here in Boston, when a woman was killed on the metro tracks and there was a local transit shutdown. So this created a temporary spike in demand for Uber, and Uber needed to deal with that by increasing availability, so an unlimited surge price was enacted. So we believe that Uber does have a responsibility to increase availability, but not by putting the burden on customers. That's why we recommend that after the 3 times surge is enacted at the first tier, after that, driver commission should be increased to incentivize drivers. So right now, Uber drivers receive 70 to 75% of fares. We recommend increasing that to up to 90% of commission when the second tier threshold is reached. So this will incentivize drivers to go out on the road during these times of need, but not put the additional burden on the customers, therefore not pricing out the less affluent. And so we think when Uber becomes significantly more affordable, your market volume will increase so much that this will positively affect profitability. At the third tier, we're talking about extraordinary levels of demand. So here we're talking about New Year's Eve in Miami or a debilitating snowstorm. And here Uber's priority should be to maximize availability of rides and clear the area. So that's why we recommend a mandatory Uber pool, which is when riders who need the same route will share rides. So the first concern that would understandably come to mind here is, what if users are just not willing to accept this mandate? So this chart shows what happened recently with demand for Uber pool when Washington, D.C. had a temporary transit shutdown. As you can see, the demand for Uber pool spiked. And this type of situation is not even close to the level of high demand that we are recommending you implement for the third tier to be reached. So we think that even though this benign situation set off such demand for Uber pool, when users really are desperate to just get a ride and get out of the area, they will be more than willing to use Uber pool. So how does our solution stack up compared to the alternate solutions James discussed earlier? We believe that our solution addresses and achieves all the desirable goals. We maintain affordability by capping the surge at 3 times. we also moderate demand with that 3-time surge price, and we create supply by incentivizing drivers a different way, by incentivizing them by increasing their commission and not putting the burden on customers. When we mandate Uber Pool when demand is the highest, then we have additional supply, because an UberX that has 1 seat available, all of a sudden there's 4 seats available in that car. So availability is maximized. So what are the expected results from a legal, business, and ethical standpoint? So if Uber implements this strategy, you will no longer be even towing the line of price gouging. So you will be getting ahead of the law. From a business standpoint, not only does this improve your brand image and earn you significant public goodwill, you will significantly increase your market volume and boost profitability while making your drivers happy, your source of supply happy, by keeping their compensation fair. And finally, going back to the fair play theory that we discussed earlier. We think that with our solution, you are successfully addressing and fulfilling the social contracts you've made with all of your stakeholders. So riders, you're not enacting exclusionary pricing for your riders, but you're still compensating your drivers fairly. During times of highest demand and during times of potential emergencies, when Uber Pool is enacted, you're prioritizing the safety of riders and drivers by maximizing availability of rides, but minimizing the number of drivers that need to get out of the road. Unlike your current model, which prices out riders rather than frivolous rides, our model is accessible and it is accessible and affordable for all classes, but it also maintains Uber's core competency of availability. So we truly believe that by implementing our solution, you as Uber can continue to pursue your ambitious goals as an innovative company, but you will maintain a high ethical standard that your stakeholders expect and deserve. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, we've heard these kinds of discussions in board meetings before. I'm having a very hard time understanding why this is an ethical issue at all. We're a luxury good. We're not even a good at all. We're a service. Look, when you talk about goods and price gouging, you're talking about Hurricane Katrina. People can't get fresh drinking water. They can't get food. There's price gouging in that circumstance is very different from surge pricing. So why is this an ethical issue?
Well, we see it as an ethical solution because we see Uber is becoming that public service. Uber, recently, San Francisco's biggest cab company, just declared bankruptcy, citing your company and Lyft as major reasons. Taxis, as it stands, serves us, create a public service that is essential in our cities today.
Yeah, but they're horribly inefficient. That's their problem.
Yes, but if Uber replaces taxis, you assume that public service that taxis provide. You assume the positive externalities of taxi service, even if they're
Let them take the
inefficient.
bus. Let them take a bus. Let them take the BART.
Well, in that case, we believe it also goes to urgency versus responsibility. The idea is that when you are the only service available to help someone in need, you have an added ethical responsibility that you might have in times of less demand. So for example, if there's a debilitating snowstorm and high demand, we assume that public transportation may be shut down. Cabs that don't add price surging fares might be filled up. Then riders are depending on you, Uber as a service who has promised your customers to be available and affordable. Now because you have that availability and you are able to pick up that customer, you have an added responsibility to do so. We believe that's where the ethical problem comes from.
And in addition to that, I mean, your own mission statement says you won't compare yourselves to running water. I don't think anyone would consider running water a luxury good. I mean, I think you would consider it a public good instead.
It's not working out so well in Flint, Michigan.
That's very true. But that is, I think that you could never say that that would not be an ethical dilemma or an ethical issue.
I guess I have to swing back and forth between the ethical and economic issue. I'm not sure how we're being penalized right now. Is there a demonstrable facts that you can point to say that the current pricing situation isn't serving society and the greatest number of consumers?
So let's take you back to this graph that shows that your major competitor Lyft, which offers a similar surge pricing strategy, but has generated more goodwill for its customers. This is just from 2012. You were not running since 2009. This is just from 2012 when Lyft was founded. 2014. You can see exponential growth in both passengers and drivers. You need both. You need passengers, obviously, to accept your rides, but you need drivers because they're going to your competitors. They're going to Lyft because there are very low switching costs. So from an economic standpoint, if you don't generate more goodwill, if you don't take on these ethical practices and recommendations that we've offered, your company is not going to be able to meet the expectations of your shareholders who expect you to meet this lofty goal of filling this public role that you have stated in your own mission statement.
All right. I have a couple of questions and a couple of comments.
Sure.
The first question is, your model works for the US only, or you're thinking to expand the model to other countries?
So we've focused on the U.S., but because we haven't looked at specific regulations in all of the countries, but at the same time, we know that this is a significant issue in other countries. In India, Uber has had significant legal battles that it's been dealing with because of surge pricing, pricing out classes of customers that start depending on Uber. And like the city terrorist tax, for example, that was extremely exploitative, and you had a lot of public backlash for that. So we do think that this solution is transferable internationally because there's nothing malign about it. Then you're no longer going to be considered even towing the line of price gouging in any regulatory court.
Right. So my comment then is because when you think in Uber in the US, we have many competitors, right? You have the subway, you have the taxis, you have the limousines. But when you're talking about Uber in Europe, it's pretty much the same. When I get out of the airport in France, I can get a BMW or Mercedes for the price of a taxi. So that's not a solution for me. I'm competing with a Mercedes or we are computer against the subway. But when you're talking in other countries like Mexico, that's a solution, a transportation solution, because I have to choose if I want to get in a crowded subway or I want to be pleasant in the back seat of my Uber, drinking water and listening the music I like, right? I think that Uber is not defined as a transportation service. They're define themselves as a connecting service. They're connecting a driver with a user. There's no ownership on the cars. There's no relationship between the driver and Uber. So it's kind of different because when we're talking about the necessity of certain goods, as water, we need to think in if there's a replacement, if there's a substitute to that, right? When we're talking about water, there's no substitution to water.
Yeah.
But you have other options with Uber. You
Yes.
have taxis, you have limos, and you have other services.
So what I'm hearing from the question is two parts. One, Uber is a service. They're not providing transportation. They're just providing the technology, right? And then the second is what do we do about competitors? There's substitution.
Right.
So to the response to the first question, while Uber and as a board of directors, you have established that you are just this technology service. However, from multiple perspectives, it might not be so. Uber maintains control over how much drivers charge. Uber unilaterally sets surge pricing. It also unilaterally sets fares. And that is something that has upset drivers recently with the falls in fares in direct response to New Year's Eve. So while Uber, yes, it does provide this technology platform, the amount of control Uber has over that operation of that ride, it controls everything from the tap to the rating methods, to the routing of Uber Pool. We believe that Uber has a responsibility here to also control its pricing, because you already do control your pricing. So we believe that there is a pricing transportation play that's occurring. And in terms of competitors, do you guys want to take this one?
Sure. So again, your mission is to fill this role, this void. You talked about the inefficiencies of the taxi system. You want to make the taxi system more innovative, more efficient. So while you mentioned that Uber is a connecting service, many people take it to the airport, from the airport or to the airport and back. It's also filling another role in many other places, in towns rather than cities. It's often, since there isn't developed public transit, it's often the only option for many people instead of car ownership. And you have also made it your mission to decrease car ownership by using Ubers. People don't need cars as much. because they can just take an Uber from place to place. And in the many towns that you operate in, if you don't own a car, then Uber might be your only option. So in these cases, our recommendation holds.
What do you think would happen if on New Year's Eve, we offered the service free? Because we don't want drunk people driving, we don't want them getting hit, crossing the street. Would that be a good thing?
So two things about that question. For one, on New Year's Eve, yes, sure. It would generate enormous goodwill. It would be great for Uber as a company. There would be financial impacts. Secondly, New Year's Eve is a specific situation. Our model is designed not to be situational based. We're not, under the present model Uber's being regulated under. If an AG declares an emergency, Uber changes, like in New York City, is forced to change its pricing model away from this unlimited to a cap. In our model, we're not looking at events. We honestly, it doesn't matter whether it's New Year's Eve, it's a snowstorm, a concert just got out. It doesn't matter because there is a time of need dictated by demand. We're removing Uber from the decision making of what is more needy. Removing Uber from the situation of making these value statements and opening you up to enormous reputational risk, where people say, you thought this was important, but actually this is important to me as a customer. This event, drunk driving, or things like that. So it's purely demand-based. So thinking about specific situations and how Uber reacts in them, our model eliminates that whole need for the company to debate internally because of it. And it's why we thought of this model originally, because we were caught up on that idea of what is a time of need. And so we developed the model ourselves to remove that consideration at all.
So I guess I need a little bit more convincing as to why we should be the corporate savior here. We are not a bus company. We're not a railroad. We provide a private service.
So it's very easy for us to, this was a challenge for us too when we were looking at what you should do. And it's easy to think about this from a New York or Boston mindset, where there are buses and there's subways, there's metro systems. But the truth is that Uber is in 404 cities around the world, and Uber is in transit deserts where there's no other mode of transportation that's accessible. And so we wanted a model that works everywhere unilaterally. And we also think that when Uber is causing the bankruptcy of established taxi services, then Uber cannot take away that service from consumers, but not fulfill the responsibility that those services were originally providing. So we believe that Uber has a responsibility if it's trying to fulfill this role of a public service, it's actually putting the current modes of transportation out of business. It cannot do that and take advantage of that and accept the benefits of doing that but still fail to fulfill the obligations that come with that responsibility.
I think what most convinced me was all of definitely what my colleagues have said, but also Uber has declared this themselves with their product offerings and the way that they've positioned themselves, both with like their mission statement, their strategic communications, their advertising, everything about them says they want to be the mainstay of this. They want to replace taxis. They want to be the transportation of choice.
And unless that mission becomes true, because I guess if Uber doesn't want that responsibility, they can drop that strategic communication. But the only way Uber can meet that $40 billion valuation is to become that. If Uber as a company decides to drop that distinction of being this public service that is used reliable as water everywhere for everyone, New York to Oklahoma City, Tulsa, Oklahoma, where there is no transit options, buses are very infrequent, things like that, Uber needs to satisfy this need. Otherwise, your shareholders will be in for a very painful ride.
Right. Questions. The first one, with these fares, 9 times the regular fares, do you know how many of these, during this period, how many people use Uber using those fares?
We don't have exact statistics, and it'd be great if we could get them from you, if you could release them to us.
Only 9.
Only 9.
Only 9. Because the people didn't want to use it because of the price.
then what we would point to, I guess, there's a breakdown in this pricing model.
Right.
And then the pricing model needs to be changed. And as it stands, it isn't ethical, because if you're saying only 9 people use that price, then a 9 times is unethical, because nobody could use the service, no matter how important their need was, because there definitely were more than 9 drivers on the road.
And this is particularly concerning because the 9 times price surge itself shows that there is demand, but the lack of people taking it shows that they necessarily used an alternative. Now, our fear there is they may have driven home, which causes a real problem for the public at large, which is another important stakeholder.
Or maybe that means that the people use the subway, the bus, or other transportation instead of Uber.
Well, across the country, most transit systems were closed at that time. I believe there's only 8 24-hour rapid rail systems in the entire country, most of them in the Northeast. But most buses are unreliable. And most buses, I think, outside of major metropolitan areas with established subway services don't really run at those times either, or they're running on hourly 2-hour routes where they don't go to places where people need, or they go to places where people need and they take 4 hours instead of taking 20 minutes. We see that a lot in LA. So I'm a translator. Or things like that. Or they walked. But the issue with walking is our cities aren't built to walk. And we see experiences like, recently there was a major story out of Detroit that a man was walking 26 miles every day just to make it to work, because public transit did not serve from his house to his plant at a major manufacturing car plant. And that's an urban failure across the country. And
but that's not our problem.
It isn't your problem, but Uber is filling that failure.
Look,
And
Western civilization is not going to rise and fall based on our pricing model.
When you created your mission statement and compared yourself to running water, you made that your problem. That is what we're arguing. If you want to continue to do surge pricing and price yourself as a luxury good, then you could have done that when you were simply just a black car service, but you are no longer a black car service. You consistently advertise yourself as cheaper, more accessible than any other transportation service. You compare yourself to running water. You cannot make these claims and not fulfill the responsibility that comes with them.
And you're starting to be treated by a public service by your regulatory agencies, which is another legal consideration that you really have to keep in mind. Maryland has designated you under the Public Service Commission as a common carrier. That is necessarily going to affect your ability to price surge. And we want you to be able to be ahead of these regulations so that they don't impact you negatively in the future.
What happens if I decide to refund to those 9 people the entire cost of the ride?
So that's what happened during the Sydney terrorist attacks. People faced exorbitant prices as they were trying to leave the area of danger, and then they were refunded afterwards, which seems like a good model, but it's not sustainable. And you as a company can't say, this is when we will decide to refund you after the fact.
With 9 individuals, I think that's going to be
also-
affordable.
The problem is, if you have a less affluent person who doesn't even have that much money in their bank account to leave the area of danger, you are not fulfilling your ethical responsibility as a public service to that person because she cannot afford it in the first place.
Right, that's partially true when you have a catastrophe like that. But you don't have snowstorms every week. You don't have attacks every week. So that's important to see that how often that could happen.
Right.
Before we institute a model where it will apply in a rush hour in a Friday, right?
Well, our model doesn't. This model is essentially your operations 360 days out of the year will stay the same because these thresholds will be very difficult to reach. This is the threshold that is perhaps reached at 5 p.m. This is reached most commonly, but this is reached maybe 2 days out of the year, if that, and this is reached maybe no days out of the year. So this is not a model that's significantly changing how your company runs. Your company's going to run the same. It's just when those times of need happens, Uber isn't going to be scrambling to figure out how to be unethical, how to maintain profitability, how to deal with public outrage. This is a simple model for consumers to understand, for drivers to understand, and it deals with the accessibility and affordability
Talking
issue.
about that. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry, I don't mean. So have you, maybe it escaped me, but have you defined how you reach those levels and what the economic impacts are?
So the levels are reached by demand. Uber already has an algorithm that measures demand based on like consumers opening the app and looking for cars. So Uber, you have that algorithm developed. All we're saying is you have to change how you react when those demand levels are reached. When the demand level reaches, the algorithm is proprietary, we haven't seen it, but when it reaches the point where, that it reaches during a rush hour on a Friday, that essentially you're going to do the same thing you've always done. You're going to have this price, surge price. But when it reaches the demand that was reached in transit shutdown, instead of going to a 5-6 times surge price, you're just going to increase the driver commission. And when you have a snowstorm hit or you have New Year's Eve and you normally would have a 10-11 times multiple, you're going to mandate Uber pool.
So what's going to happen when the Lady Gaga concert lets out at Yankee Stadium? 60,000 people get on their apps and they're looking for a car.
It's based on demand.
It's probably going to be somewhere around here. That's what we...
But it's all based on demand. So the benefit of this model is we're not differentiating between the city terrorist attack and a Lady Gaga concert because it's not your company's place to do so. After the Sydney terrorist attack, yes, you refunded your customers, but there was major backlash for the fact that there was surge pricing and that exorbitant rates in the first place. Your company cannot say this is where you get your money back and this is where you don't. A model that's based on demand takes away that responsibility from you, so that if there's a Lady Gaga concert where 60,000 people are trying to leave Madison Square Garden, it will hit X level of demand based on your algorithm, and the appropriate action will take place.
And just to expand, so what if there was a terrorist attack during the Lady Gaga concert, right when it was supposed to end? Do you as a company have the ability to have an eye in there and know, oh, a terrorist attack happened, we need people out, we can't surge? As a company, would you have that ability?
But if we're not free to raise our prices to whatever we want, we can't afford high-priced consultants like you.
We don't think you're going to lose any ability to afford anything because we think our solution is going to boost your profitability because your market volume is going to increase substantially. When you have a whole portion of the market that is going to be able to afford Uber, that quantity is going to increase your profits. Because these events where you even made money off of 10 times surge pricing, it happened maybe one time a year in one city in one country. That's not where your money is coming from. But our model ensures that Uber does become a mainstay of transportation. So you're going to have a huge market volume increase. Your profitability is going to grow. You're going to be able to afford very high-priced consultants.
And when we talk about one city occurring, when New York City hit 10 to 11 times, that was seen across the country. Uber became a media darling, but for a reason you don't want. So that person in Kansas City who's debating, should I use a car service for the first time in my life today, and they see 10 times that this company will do this to me, they're not going to use it. And that limits your ability to grow anywhere. If what you do this one place, everywhere is threatened.
And just remember that your valuation and your financial condition is not secure right now. It's not guaranteed. You have competitors from every angle offering different business models, and they are threatening your riders and your passengers. And whether they succeed or not, because maybe they won't, maybe they're just burning through cash and they will never achieve profitability. That doesn't matter to you if you lose valuation, if you lose your valuation because of it. So if Lyft burns out in 10 years, it doesn't matter if your valuation decreases 20 billion. So you need to ensure that you have a model that is ethical and that also changes based on demand so that you maintain your valuation. Because your competitors might be around longer than you think.
A final remark. With this recommendation that you have, from the client perspective, me as a client, how do you get benefit if you cap? Of course, you cap a threshold. But in the other two models, I don't get how I get benefit because that benefit goes in the middle to the driver, and in the top, it gets a benefit for everybody.
As a consumer, you actually gain surplus under our model. So presently the model is designed to align demand and supply curves, right? So it eliminates all surplus for either drivers or riders because a rider at 2 times under Lyft, where it should be 2.5 times, is going to be consumer surplus there. So if it should be 4 times, as a rider, you'll gain surplus. As long as you're not at that 4 times point as an individual. So there will be surplus for you at all levels because it's available to you at a price that is lower than what you were willing to pay. It's no longer at that 10 times, it's at that 3 times. And so that surplus is provided by these features changing how drivers behave, and these features changing how supply interacts. So we're creating surplus from the supply side now, instead of meeting exactly at that demand equilibrium, but at the same time pricing out consumers.
So that means that in the first example, if I have to pay cab to 3 times $10. In the second level, I will pay the same $10.
Yes.
But the driver will get more commission.
Yes.
I don't see that commission, so I don't care really what happens.
You
to the
do
driver.
care. You do care because you're getting that ride. If drivers aren't paid well, if they're not compensated in times of high demand, they won't go on the road. So yes, you won't see a lower fare, but you will get a ride in the time that you ask for it. And especially in times of high demand, that's when you need the rides quickly, more quickly the most.
I'm gonna have to so we can step out of character. You guys can take deep breaths. I want to say, I want you guys on my side, whatever issue I'm dealing with. Well done. I love the fact that you didn't use notes, that you're comfortable enough with your material and with each other to be able to do this presentation with a group of 5 of you with some pretty aggressive questioning. Well done.
Thank you.
I don't know where the aggressiveness came from. I will also just add to that, extremely impressive. Very confident. Obviously, you're very knowledgeable about the subject matter. You've done your homework. You're comfortable with it. I thought that your graphics were spot on as well in terms of the ability to portray them out to an audience and understand them. If I may, just a couple of quick things. I would slow down a little bit in your presentation, but that's just minor. The other point is that at times you refer to Uber in the third party as they. We are Uber, so you need to direct it to us, the board. Otherwise, I thought that it was an excellent presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I echo the opinions of my colleagues. I think that you made an excellent work. You see the perspective of the company, giving solutions, and also taking a look to the client, to the final user. That's an important thing. It's not all about the money. It's not all about the profit in the short, medium term, but as well how can we prevail with the other competitors in the industry. A couple of remarks. I think that those are good solutions, but maybe and sometimes the client, the user, the final user of Uber, they have to do their part as well. Maybe as a company, if you suggest them, if you move a couple blocks to a lower rate, if you do this or that as user, you will get benefit. In that way, you get engaged with the client. You want that these people use the application over and over, right? So if you interact only with the driver, that's fine because you will have service. You need a client for that service. So it's important that you get engaged with the client and find out a way that the final client comes back to you and use your application as much as possible.
I thought you did a very nice job in a very difficult environment. This is a new industry, and every aspect of it is uncertain. But you came down on the side of the company and holding our feet to the fire in terms of our mission statement and what we've stated our values to be, and at every point you kept coming back to that.
If I may just add on to that, I think that's critical because you have to hold our feet to the fire on that. If this is what you believe in and this is the company that you are, and I just thought it was excellent going back to it and tying it into the issue. The other thing is, I thought your response in terms of being ahead of the curve and the legal implications, I think that is an extremely strong argument to join with the ethical. Because it is. This is a brand new industry. States are beginning to take a very long and in-depth look, and you want to get ahead of it to help in the future. So.
And use it, new use it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well done. Oh, would you have any recommendations?